Actually, I don't outline and I don't write speeches. So you're going to have to suffer through it off the cuff. So I'm going to do a little history of how I came to be standing here in front of you and why that should inspire you or make you go to the bathroom. So here's the deal. I grew up in a very angry household. No, we didn't have to go to labor, we weren't in a labor camp. We were poor, we were fairly poor, but my family expressed their love through anger. We shouted at each other, it's what we did. I don't know if any of you grew up in a household like that, but we certainly did. And when you live in a household where everybody screams at each other, the end result of that is that no one hears anything. And people have asked me over the years, how did I come to be a writer? Other than the obvious answer, I had no talent for anything else. The answer is that I needed a way to be heard. And when I was 12 and 13 years old, I realized I couldn't scream any louder than anyone else in my family. I didn't love them any more or less than we all loved each other. But I needed a way to be heard. And poetry was my way to be heard. In fact, I was on my JV football team, I had a promising start to being a high school football player. I was the long snapper, the guy on punts and field goals, who snapped the ball, and that is actually a talent much like writing, because in a room full of people, not this room full of people, because obviously there's way more talent in this room than a typical room full of people, there are only a few people who would have the talent to write. And the snapping thing was, on a whole roster of football players, I was the only one who could do it. And at Sleuthfest, I've actually done that. I've actually brought a football in and asked everybody in the class to snap a football like 10 yards. And then I say, you see, one or two people can do it. And you realize you guys are special, because I don't know how much talent you have, but you have to have some talent to write. So a round of applause for you guys, because you need to take some credit. So I gave up football to write poetry. Now, how many people can say that? No, by the time I left high school, I was the editor of the literary magazine and had pretensions of being the most famous writer who went to my high school. Now, that's a little tough when I found out that Arthur Miller and Joseph Heller went to my high school, as did Mel Brooks. So I'm going to try and settle for temporarily the most famous mystery writer who went to my high school. So I thought, poetry is no way to make a living, as is most writing. It's no way to make a living. So I went to college, and during college I worked on the literary magazine. I've been published since I was 15, and if you think that's a great accomplishment, in some ways I guess it is. I was heard. I got heard, which is what I wanted to be. But poetry, anybody here publish poetry? Right? You like getting paid in extra copies? So that's usually how you get paid. And unless you can use it for extra fiber, the pages for extra fiber. So I knew, and also another lesson was that I knew poetry and maybe other forms of writing wasn't the best way to make a living, since Allen Ginsberg, John Ashbery, and it would all be taught at Brooklyn College. I kind of figured, if these guys have to teach at Brooklyn College, this might not be my future. But like I said, I grew up poor, so I don't know, maybe I was headed that way. Well, I won't go through the long list of jobs that I had. As many writers have, they go through all sorts of weird jobs. But for 5 years, I worked at the cargo area at Kennedy Airport. You know, you ever see the movie Goodfellas? Those are the people I work with. They were all named Vinny. No, seriously, I can see the Lufthansa building out of my office window. And there was one day during the week that I had to go from Kennedy Airport, which is in Queens, to Manhattan for meetings. And I had 3 or 4 hours to kill between the time I would leave work and have the meetings. And so I thought, you know, let me take a class back at Brooklyn College. Let me take a night class, it's on the way. So I looked at the school bulletin, the night class bulletin, and the one class in English that fit my schedule was American detective fiction. That's the truth. It was the one class that fit my schedule that I was at all interested in. And I never read detective fiction. I never read crime fiction. I was a science fiction guy. I was a literary guy. Kurt Vonnegut was my favorite writer. And now I'm published by the same publishing company as him. So I think that's really cool. He would laugh at me. So I took this class, and to me, crime fiction were the cheesy books on my dad's nightstand. The ones with the lurid covers, you know, the ones that look like hard case crime covers now. So I was never interested in that class. Well, I took this class at Brooklyn College, and the first 3 books we read were The Continental Op by Dashiell Hammett, Farewell My Lovely by some unknown guy named Raymond Chandler, and The Maltese Falcon. And I went home to my wife after that class that we discussed The Maltese Falcon, and I said, I want to quit my job. This is what I was born to do. And for the second time in her life, she said yes to me, and has regretted it deeply for 33 years. And so I quit my job. A very good, in the mid-'80s, I was making $40,000 a year. I had a company car. I had an expense account. I used to go to Europe for free, Scotland many times actually, for free, in France. And I gave that up for this nutty profession, okay? Well, so that's how I got here, sort of, but with a lot of struggles in between. But there's something that I don't think we think about enough. Writers think a lot about marketing platforms and getting an agent and how do I write a query letter and what do I do about self-publishing? Should I or shouldn't I? Which route should I take? But there's something sometimes I think even I don't think enough about. And that's the tool of our profession, which is words. One of my poetry professors at Brooklyn College, a guy named James Merritt, used to love to tell this apocryphal story. He said Rimbaud and one of the Impressionist painters went out to lunch once, and Rimbaud said, you know, I think, the painter said to Rimbaud, you know, I think I could be a very good poet. I have such great ideas. And Rimbaud said, my friend, poems are written with words, not with ideas. That has always left a really strong impression on me because the tool that we use, it's not a computer, it's the words. And sometimes we forget that. It gets lost in the maze of worries about getting published. And believe me, those worries never go away. You know, I am standing up here, at the time that I'm standing up here, I have the number 13 book on the New York Times bestseller list, right? But when, who was I talking to before said, you know, you don't seem happy about that. And I said, I'm relieved. I said I'm relieved because it means that as long as I keep getting on the bestseller list, that means there's another book. So the anxiety never goes away. The self-doubts never go away. So if you're waiting for that to happen, you know, and if you talk to Lee Child, he'll tell you that the doubts are still there too. So that stuff never disappears. But the tool we work with, the clay we work with, words, they are what we should focus on, because that's what we can depend on. Another famous apocryphal story is how a woman came to a poet, a very famous poet, and said, you know, I think, Professor, my son could be a great writer. He's brilliant. And she went on and listed all these things he could do, and the poet said, but does he love to play with words? And that is the key to writing. In fact, what's funny is words will pop into my head, and they'll stay in my head, like earworm songs, right? I will get words in my head, and they will go over and over, and I'll, you know, what form can I put them in? What can I do with that word? And so, words have always, the sound of words has always fascinated me. It's always been something that, you know, I hope until the day I die, you know, words will interest me. They'll ring in my head. They'll pop up out of places I don't expect. And another thing about words is we shouldn't be stingy with them. In a room full of people who write, and some of whom are beginning to write or have only written a few books, there's one phrase that I've always used. I can't say that I coined it, but you can say that I coined it. It's that there's no such thing as wasted writing. Every bit of writing you do makes you a better writer. And one of the frustrating things I found when I would teach at Hofstra was Hofstra University, by the way, the university famous for two things. Bernie Madoff, who was our greatest alum, and the presidential debates. Otherwise, no one ever hears of Hofstra University. Is that when writers who in my classes would cling, they would write something and they would cling to it fiercely. They would tinker with it a little, but they would cling to it. And I would tell them that you have to realize there's a difference between, like I would tell them, I have my children and I have my work, and I never get them confused. You know, it's just words, and there are lots of words. And so when you cling too strongly to something and are convinced it's too good, you know, that you're not doing yourself a service by that. You have to, I'm not saying that the minute someone criticizes your work that you should, you know, either burn it or run to change it, but be open to doing more work. A lot of books that have potential, that could get published, die in slush piles because people cling too fiercely to them, to the original. And so I would counsel you to be more free. There is no such thing as wasted words. And to prove this, for my students about 5 or 6 years ago, I no longer teach that, by the way. You know, I'm not, Hofstra's not famous for me either. I toted up how many words, a good estimate of how many words I had written in my life, and it was something like 4 million. And to which I have now added about 600,000 words. Now, several 100,000 words of that were grocery lists. So, but they count too. I just want to leave you guys with one. I don't want to ramble on. I can do stand-up for hours. Believe me, I can. My great uncle was Henny Youngman. So take my wife, please. Yes, and it's true. He was my great uncle. He wasn't so great. Words are amazing things. You know, magicians. They're illusionists, right? They're making believe. But think about the power of words. This is what I want to leave you with. I have an idea in my head, or you have an idea in your head, right? And it's an idea. It's something that you can't grab onto, right? It's this thing in your head. It's chemical, electrical impulses in your head. You sit down and you write it down on a computer or on paper or whatever you write it on. And an agent is willing to represent it. And some editor is willing to pay you tens of thousands of dollars to publish it. And you know, I don't think people think about this much. It's a thing in your head that becomes this other thing. That then it's a book, right? Then it's a book. And think of how artificial that is. Well, you're sitting in a movie theater. You're sitting there and passively letting the images, the sound wash over you. You're watching TV. You're sitting back. You're passively letting it watch it. Now, you're involved, of course, because you're reacting to it. You're listening to music. You're at a concert. You're reacting to it. It's washing over you. You have a thing in your hand, whether it's a Kindle or a book, right? It's this thing that's obviously, you know, artificial, and you're holding it, or it's plugged into your ears. And you were willing to pay $27 for that thing, or $9.99 as a download, right? For this thing, this artificial thing in your hand, and you know it's there. And that money you spent, you can't put gas in your car with it. You can't feed yourself with it. That's money gone for this artificial thing. And you know you're reading when you're reading, right? It's not like sitting in a movie theater or watching TV or being at a concert. Yet, you are transported. Think about that. Think about how powerful words are. That you can travel to galaxies, you can travel back in time, you can be on the mean streets of Los Angeles or Brooklyn, you can be anywhere. And you're sitting there or standing there with a thing in your hand that's as it's as artificial as can be. There's no music with it. There's no images with it. You supply the images. Reading is magical in that you're involved in it. You're involved. I always view writing as giving the reader enough information to make a good movie in his or her head. So I want to leave you with that thought. Instead of worrying so much about writing query letters or what you're going to do next, focus a little attention on the power and the magic that you hold in your hands. Thank you very much.